Okay, so in this Bikotic episode I have set a budget of £999 to see what sort of road bike you can get for that money. But this sort of price, I'm thinking it's somebody who is just starting out in road riding, or possibly it's their second bike. So the bikes I've decided to look at are these 5 here. We've got the Scott Speedster 10, the Giant Contend SL1, the Trek Domane ALR3, the Specialized Allez Elite, I think that's how you say it, and the Canyon Endurace AL7. So I've racked my brains to try and come up with a way of explaining what you get for £999, and to that end I've sort of come up with this little graph that I'll try and explain here. Let's imagine you've got a pretty decent rider, intermediate rider, producing about 250 to 300 watts, and he's on the flat, no wind, and he's tucked in. If he was on a Halford special bike, and the cheapest one I could find was 180 quid, I think, one could imagine, and I've made all these numbers up, you'd have to do a test to actually work this out. This is just an attempt to explain what you get for £999. So if you're on a £180 bike from Halford's and you're this pretty good rider, let's say you're going to be averaging a speed of about 18 miles an hour, because that bike weighs about 11 kilograms. If, however, you spend upwards of £11,000, so pretty much a bike that costs more than your average Tour de France rider will ride, and with the same rider on it, perhaps they're going to go 27 mile an hour. So it's just hypothetical numbers, but it's going to be in that region, maybe. In my opinion, there's a price sweet spot with the price of bikes currently, which is sort of between £2,500 and £4,000. My preference for a road bike is about £3,500, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll see me mention that, because I sort of see that as the sweet spot on the curve between what you have to pay and what you get and what that bike's capable of doing. So for £3,500, you're going to get a bike that you can race on, chain gang, do the fast social ride on the weekend. It's more than enough bike for most people out there. Getting back to this video, we're talking about £999, and you'll see in a minute, but the bikes weigh more in the region of 9 kilograms as opposed to the sweet spot bikes that are more in the region of 7 kilograms. So I've just hypothetically come up with some numbers here. This intermediate rider, at a wild guess, on a £999 bike, he's going to be averaging some sort of speed at, like, say, let's call it 23.2 miles an hour. So you can see that if you're in a group of people who are riding the more expensive bike, over a given time, you are going to struggle to keep up with them. However, if that's your budget, that's your budget. And if you're just starting out in road riding, it's best to check that you enjoy it fully before you start upping your amount of money that you'll spend on your bike. Anyway, hopefully that makes some sense, and let's get back to the bikes we're going to have a look at. Now, the other thing I just wanted to mention before I get into the bikes is it's worth understanding the different group sets that you get on these bikes. So just concentrating on Shimano, because that's what most of these bikes have on them. Your top of the range is called Endurace, and if you get the electronic shifting version, it's called Di2, so Endurace Di2. The mechanical is called just Endurace, and that's 11 speed. The next price range down, and this is pretty much the sweet spot group set, is called Ultegra. And again, the electronic version of that is called Di2. The mechanical version is called Ultegra. And then the group set down from that is called 105. And if anybody knows why it's called 105, please leave a comment down below, because I've always been curious about that. I've got no idea why it's called that. And 105 you can still get in 10 or 11 speed. Mostly 11 speed is the modern one now. In my opinion, 105 is about the lowest in the Shimano group set that you want to have on your bike. Obviously you want Endurace Di2, so with 105 you've got a very competent group set that you can do sportifs, chain gangs, all that kind of stuff on. Really the main thing you get from a Endurace group set is it's a bit lighter. As I've mentioned before, you get diminishing returns from the amount of money you spend. But if you go below the 105, next up is Tiagra, 10 speed. Next up, Sora, 9 speed. Next up, Claris, 8 speed. They all work absolutely fine. They'll be a little bit heavier than 105. Cyclists can be quite snobby. I wouldn't buy a bike that didn't have at least 105 on it. So it's worth remembering all these, because when you go into the bike shop, these are the things you want to look at. The other thing to look out for is that the manufacturers are quite clever in the way that they work, and they might mostly put on 105 group set, but then swap out the the crank and chain rings for a cheaper version. Likewise, the brakes. So you might get a bike with 105 transmission, but then they put on some cheaper brakes. So you just need to watch out for that. Okay, so the first bike up that we're going to have a look at is the Scott Speedster 10. 8.85 kilograms, and it doesn't say which bike they measured, whether it was medium or small or whatever, so I don't know. £999, not a bad looking bike, quite like the colour. It's got a carbon fork, so that's good. But all the bikes we're looking at today, the frame is made of aluminium. These days the manufacturers are quite clever with the way that they make the aluminium frames, because they smooth the welds out, and to the untrained eye you think you're looking at a carbon frame. But if you look closely, you can see the welding, and that's how you know that it's aluminium. Okay, so this bike has got 105 derailleurs, 11 speed. It's a good ratio of gears, so it's a 50-34 and an 11-32, so you're going to be able to get up everything with that. Where Scott have saved some money is they've put some third-party brakes on. Tektro. I tried to look up Tektro, I'd never heard of them. But it turns out they make quite a lot of the cheaper brakes that go on these cheaper bikes. And the other thing is the cassette isn't a 105, and the chain set or crank set and chain rings isn't 105. It is Shimano but not 105. So that's the Scott Speedster. Next up we've got the giant Contend SL1, 9 kilograms. Now this was measured on a small, so the time you've got a medium frame, who knows what you're looking at there, 9.2 maybe. Quite a different frame shape from the Scott, more of a compact frame, a little bit shorter, and this bike comes with a carbon composite fork. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I think it might mean that the fork legs are carbon and the steerer tube is aluminium. And whether or not the fact that Scott call theirs carbon means it's got a carbon steerer, not sure. If you know what the answer to that is, leave a comment below. So the Giant comes with 105 front and rear derailleurs. It's got the Tektro brakes on again. At least this time we've got a 105 cassette, and again we've got a cheaper Shimano crankset, but we've got the same gear ratios as we have on the Scott. So again, you'll be able to get up anything. Okay, so that's the Giant Contend SL1. Next up to have a look at Trek Domane Al3. So this is coming in on the heavy side, measured on a medium frame, 9.44 kilograms. So that's quite a heavy bike. And not only that, you're paying another £1 for this bike. Now, the Trek has a cool feature in the frame, which has trickled down from their more expensive bikes, like the Domane, and it's called the ISO Speed decoupler. At least that's what it's called on the more expensive bike. And the idea of that is it allows the seat tube to flex slightly when you go over bumps, making it more comfortable. But there's a huge catch with this bike. This really affects its score for me, is this bike comes with Soarer, which, if you remember, Soarer is 2 down from 105, 9 speed. So that's a pretty big compromise in comparison to the other bikes on this list. Again, we've got the cheaper Tektro brakes and not the 105s. Carbon fork again, but it's hard to get away from the 9 speed. So you need to think carefully about that one. Okay, so next up we've got the Specialized Allez Elite. I think it's Allez or Allez, however you want to say it. This comes in at 8.77 kilograms in a medium. That's the lightest one so far, isn't it? Yes. £999, bang on the budget. Carbon fork again, and we've got 105 front and rear derailleur, 11 speed. However, we have something called a Praxis Works crank, which I quite like the look of. In fact, I actually prefer the styling of that over the Shimano one, but I don't know performance-wise where that comes in really. So that's actually called a Praxis Alba 2D. Same chain rings as the other two bikes we've looked at. The cassette is a 105, 1132, so that's good. And again, we've got the Tektro Axis caliper brakes. So far, all the bikes have got the cheaper brakes on. And it's a good looking bike, this one. I quite like this. I even quite like the colour. It's a bit different. If you follow bike racing at all, you'll know this styling straight away comes from its esteemed bigger brother Tarmac, which for me is one of the best looking bikes on the market at the moment. Ridiculously light at 6.35 kilograms. It's the S-Works Tarmac Ultralight. Only problem is this one cost £9,000. Obviously quite a lot of money. But interestingly, if you overlay the touch points on the front here of the Ultralight and then compare that to a Lee aluminium bike for £999, you'll see that the frame has borrowed a lot of cues from the tarmac, but the most important change is how much higher up the headset is. So the tarmac being a full-fledged race bike ridden by the pros, they need to get much lower at the front because they're used to being in an aero position for the whole day. So you can see how this bike is designed much more for someone who wants some comfort. But it's a good looking bike, that, so a thumbs up. Okay, so next up we've got the Canyon Endurace AL7, so AL aluminium, 8.4 kilograms in a medium, so that's our lightest one so far. So well done, Canyon. It's not too bad a weight for this price range. Carbon fork, Shimano 105 11-speed derailleurs front and rear. The first bike with a full Shimano 105 5034 crankset, and we've got the 105 1132 cassette. So Canyon have stuck on the full Shimano 105, and this is the first bike in the list that's done that, and it's even got the 105 brakes on it. So that's good, well done Canyon. It's also got a fairly decent set of Grand Prix tyres on it. Just have a quick look at the differences in the geometry between all these bikes. Let's take the Canyon bike as our base geometry, and we just mark out the sort of important measurements, and that's where you make contact with the handlebars at the front there, where the seat tube is in relation to the handlebars, the wheelbase, and where the bottom bracket sits. Okay, so that's the Canyon, and it's the Endurace. So I know that this geometry is quite designed for comfort. I've actually done a whole video where I compare the Endurace with the Aero Road and the Ultimate, which are two other bikes in Canyon's range. If you watch that video, you'll see how this is a nice, comfortable bike for sort of new riders and people who want to be comfortable on their bike. So let's compare this against the Specialized. Fairly similar, other than, the Specialized has just got more space as in above the head tube. So you could stack up the Canyon if you wanted to. That's the only real difference there. The seat set back very slightly further, so you just stretched out a little bit more. Bottom bracket's slightly lower, but not by much. Next up, the Trek. So there's quite a big difference there. Assuming that this is the same size frame that's been photographed, my guess is it probably is. Trek, the seat is set slightly further back, and the stack height's a little bit higher, so you are going to be stretched out a little bit more. And the bike is a little bit longer, so it's going to be a little bit more stable going fast, but not quite as flickable in the corners. Next up, the Giant. Now the Giant, very similar to the Canyon, or depending how you look at it, maybe the Canyon's very similar to the Giant. Pretty much the same wheelbase, very similar stack height, very similar seat position. Yep, pretty uncanny. Next up, Scott. Now then, the Scott, quite a bit longer, so again it's going to be stable at high speed, but not quite as flickable as the Canyon. But you do look quite stretched out on the Scott. The seat set back a little bit more, so possibly not quite as comfortable as the Canyon for a new rider. But that's just an observation. Okay, so conclusion. Well, I'm going to go with the Canyon in first spot. It's the lightest. It's got the best overall group set package. So we're going to give the Canyon the top spot. That's a pretty good bike for £999, delivered to your door in a box, because you can't buy it from a shop. Second place, I'm going to give to the Specialized Allez Elite, second lightest in this set of bikes, and I've also given it the best looking. I think it looks pretty cool. Third place is the Giant, and it was very tight between the Scott and the Giant, the Scott coming in fourth, and I've given it to the Giant because I feel the Scott might be a bit stretched out. The stem it comes with looks a bit long to me. But both good bikes, and in fact the Scott's actually a little bit lighter than the Giant, so it was a bit of a toss-up, that one. And then I'm a bit disappointed with Trek. I've had to put their Domane Al3, I've had to put that in fifth position just because they've put the Sora group set on it, 9 speed, so it's not even in the same league as the other bikes, I'm afraid. But it is in this budget, so probably a very comfortable bike, but yep, we're going to put that in last place. The other thing that this gets is the worst quality picture. And what I mean by that, and it's across the board with Trek on their website, the pictures that they put up are really poor. They've got terrible compression on them, which makes them all sort of blurry and not very impressive at all. So come on Trek, sort yourselves out and post nice crisp pictures up. It is 2017 and most of us have got broadband now. There's no reason to put up crap pictures. Okay, so that's about it. The only other thing I wanted to just quickly mention is, and I'll probably make a video about this in the future, but the next price point up I think is about £1,500, and if you can push your budget, you can expect to get something more like the Giant TCR Advance 2, which is quite a lot lighter, over a kilogram lighter. You got the full 105, frame is carbon as well, and you're getting a pretty good bike for that. But I'll probably make a new video about this price point. I just wanted to show you what you could expect to get if you can put your budget up a bit. Anyway, if you liked the video, if it was useful to you, give me a thumbs up. And if you want to stay tuned for some new videos, then subscribe to my channel.